What's going on, guys? We are going to go over the best compositions for set 6.5, which came out a couple days ago, and this is going to be for patch 12.4. I have 9 compositions for you guys in the S and A tiers, which I think are like really viable, pretty solid, and then if you include the B tiers, which is a bunch of rerolls, you have 14 comps you can go right now. So we are going to be going over how to play all of those, how to navigate the early game in this set, which augments are the best for each composition, and how to play each and every one of these comps. I'll also go over what comps are best in which elos, so I'm going to categorize them from Iron to Platinum, Diamond to Master, and Master and above, and we'll get on into that after this summary. So let's just get right into the summary because we have a lot to cover today. In the S tier, by far the best comp right now is Hextech Sivir. It's just clearly the most played comp, one of the highest averaging comps, and essentially if like 2+ people are going for one comp and it's still doing really well, that's always going to be one of the best comps. After that, we have Socialite Irelia. It's a pretty close second, but then after these two comps, there's a pretty steep drop off into the A tier. A tiers are pretty solid. I normally like going A tiers a lot. Innovators, Chemtech, which have a lot of different versions of Chemtech, Striker, Syndicate Ahri, Renata Bruisers, and Mutant Malzahar. These are all like, A tiers are generally pretty solid. They're never your first choice, but if you get them, you're like not sad about it. Then in the B tier, I know people think like they see something in B tier and they're like, oh, that's bad, but that's not true at all. B tier just means they're more situational, or they're just like slightly weaker than everything else. For example, a Twitch reroll can easily win the game even though it's in B tier, because sometimes a comp is just in B tier just because you can't go for it every game. Whereas something like Hextech, you could go for that pretty much every game and not have any issues. But in the B tier, we have Ashe Reroll, Talon Assassins, Debonair Draven. This is the only 4-cost carry that I have in the B tier, and then we have Twitch and Senna Reroll. In the C tier, these comps I would try to stay away from as much as possible, but if you are below like Platinum right now, I would say that these comps are fine to go, as long as you know what you're doing, and these are going to be Brand, Corki, Snipers, and Yordle Veigar. Other comps that I'm going to add later are Double Trouble comps, Build Different comps, Arcanists, Misfortune Reroll, Gangplank, and Scrap. So stay tuned because a lot of the meta is going to be changing in the next couple of days and couple of weeks. So if you guys do want to be notified on the updates, go ahead and go on to my website, BunnyMuffins.lol/meta, bookmark it, do whatever. And while you are doing that, go ahead and subscribe below if you are not already. So on to the first comp in the S tier, we have the Hextech build. I'm doing a challenge right now where I'm only playing Hextech because I think it's like a pretty easy comp to play and it's getting great results. So essentially, all you really need is a static shiv on Sivir and then hit 6 Hextech, and that's pretty much all you need to do. The rest of the stuff is pretty much just the cream on the top. Alistair is going to be your main tank. I like Bramblevest and Frozen Heart on him is because he jumps into their backline and then knocks them up, so obviously he's going to be right in front of their carries. Sivir with static shiv is very important because Hextech, the trait gives a magic damage on hit for all of your Hextech units, so you end up doing a lot of magic damage, so getting a static shiv reduces their magic resistance, so it is like, also Sivir attacks super quickly, so she gets a lot of procs on it. The other items I like on Sivir is Quicksilver. I feel like it's a mandatory defensive item, and then Gwynsu's Rageblade gonna be a solid item to round it out. You could also do like double static shiv if you are lucky or fortunate. One other important thing to do is building Zeke's Herald on Lucian. This is a tech that the rank 1 Korea player is doing right now. And yeah, it's just buffs up your Sivir a lot. And yeah, you just care about buffing your Sivir. That's why it's positioned in this weird way. You could give the buff to Nocturne if you move your team over 1 square. But you do want to have Silco behind Sivir and Jarvan. The reason why you want to do this is because Silco gives mana to the units ahead of him, and Jarvan gives an AoE attack speed buff to your team with his flagpole, and then Sivir, of course, she's going to do the Bouncing Blades attack. So that's why you put Silco behind Sivir and Jarvan, and that's why the positioning's so goofy like this. Alistair's going to be your main tank in the front, so that's why he is front and center right there. And then Sejuani and Vi, you could place them on the left, you could place them on the right. It depends if you want to avoid AoE abilities, or if they don't have any AoE abilities, you could kind of just group everyone in the back here. So this comp is pretty easy to play. I'd say this is a solid comp at all ratings right now. So no matter what rank you are, this is going to be a solid comp. For item holders, I like using Rek'Sai as my damage item holder early game, and I like using Swain because he's a Hextech unit as my defensive item holder. So the reason why I put the items on Rek'Sai, even though it's a little weird, is because he is a striker, and you often play strikers in the early game. And you could also do Nocturne, so you could also itemize Nocturne, and then once you get your Sivir, sell your Nocturne, and then put all your items on Sivir instead. For the augments, the most important one, other than getting Hextech and Striker augments, is Disintegrator. So Disintegrator is really good is because it's an on-hit ability essentially, and that's what Sivir's like main thing is. Notice here I list out her items, like most of them are on-hit stuff. After that, like Celestial Blessing's good for healing, so you don't need the Bloodthirster. Weak Spot's good because it provides a health regeneration debuff to the entire enemy team. You actually don't really care about the armor reduction. Of course it helps a little bit, but you mainly care about the anti-heal. Phalanx and then Tiny Titans and Backfoots are all good buffs because it all buffs your Sivir. So pretty much anything that's good for Sivir is going to be good for you whenever you play this comp. I'm going to be coming out with a like 3-hour video compilation of only playing Hextech all the way to Masters, which should be coming out this weekend. So definitely look out for that if you are interested in more Hextech gameplay. So on to the next build, we have Socialite Irelia. This is like, yeah, the second best comp right now. You want to put Irelia on the Socialite Hex. So lucky for you, it doesn't matter where the Socialite Hex is because she could use it whether it's on the front line or the back line. And yeah, you really don't care. What's more important is getting 3 Socialite. You could also use 2. 2 or 3 works fine. If you do have 3 Socialite, you go 3 damage items. If you have 2 Socialite, you put a Bloodthirster on your Irelia. That's the only difference you need to look out for. But essentially, the core of the comp is going to be Gnar, Seraphine, and Irelia. And if you want to go 3 Socialite, add in Senna. And then I like just building support units. So Jace is good with Vi because they give Enforcer. They also provide a nice front line. And then Orianna is good because she works with Senna in terms of enchanters. And then after that, like, you just throw in Zilean because he's a leftover to get to 3 Innovators. But all the units that I mentioned that are not Gnar, Irelia, and Seraphine are all replaceable with pretty much anything because you really only care about getting the Socialite buff on Irelia and then getting items on her. The rest, it's just whatever you hit, because whatever you hit is going to give you the most gold efficient board in terms of like getting the most power out of everything. So the way to play this, you just do standard leveling. I'm going to be coming out with a leveling guide later, but it's pretty much the same thing we've been doing for the past couple of sets. You pretty much want to get to level 8 as safely as possible and then roll down most of your gold on level 8 because you're looking for Irelia, which is a 4-cost unit. But I do want to note, there are a couple of replacements for Irelia if you do not get her. You could use Sivir as a carry if the square's in the backline, and I've also seen Zeri work really well, but you could also use a bunch of random different legendary units that aren't that common because they all work really well on the Socialite Hex. But essentially, you just want to put your carry on the Socialite Hex, and that is going to be it. The best augments for this are like the Socialite augments, such as Share the Spotlight, Duet, things of that nature, and then Stand United is really good because you run a lot of different traits, and then Luden's is good, Disintegrator's good, Portable Forge is good, and Weak Spot is also pretty decent. So that's the S tier comps. Hopefully you guys are going to be playing those a lot because they are by far the best right now. Of course, that could change in the future once people discover new ways to play the game, because again, game only just came out, so a lot of times to discover stuff. Oh, and just a note, if you are below Platinum, I don't recommend the Irelia comp because it is a little tricky because you have to flex your carry a bit. This comp I see being played a lot in like top 100, so it is a more difficult comp, so you do want to keep that in mind as you are reading this. So now going down to the A tier, we have Innovators. Innovators are kind of like the go-to after the top 2 comps right now, and the reason behind that is because at the beginning of a set, most people don't know what to do, so the Innovator minion ends up being pretty decent. You see this in a lot of different sets, like the Summon trait often is really good at the start of sets, just because it gives you like a raw set amount of power. It's kind of like a stat check if you want to think about it that way, but overall it's still a pretty solid comp. You still run Socialite oftentimes, but you don't need to. The core of the build is 5 Innovator and then anything else. Most people do like Seraphine carry. You could also run Irelia carry in Innovator, so you could run the same exact comp we saw up here, except instead of the extra random units that we showed before, you play 5 Innovator instead. This build plays really similar to the old build from before because you do the ice cream cones on Orianna, and that just buffs up your Seraphine and allows her to deal pretty big damage for her spell cast, which also provides a lot of utility for your team. One new addition to the Innovator team this set is Echo, and it is very welcome because he's a great Morellonomicon item holder before you get Seraphine or Renata, and he's just a solid unit in general because he buffs attack speed and debuffs attack speed. He's definitely a lot better than Heimerdinger, which was the option before. And then the best augments for this build is obviously going to be the Innovator ones, like you want plus Innovators because you want to get to 7 if you can. Makeshift Armor is pretty good. Stand United, of course, is good because you run a lot of different traits. Disintegrator and Meditation, these two depend on what type of comp you're running, and then Ludens is also good because Seraphine and the rest of your team casts a bunch of times. Now on to the next build, we have Chemtech, so I'm going to show you guys two builds. Essentially, like, you could flex between 7, 5, and 3 Chemtech, and yeah, there are a ton of different variations. The first build I'm going to show you is the Tryndamere Warwick reroll build. This one revolves around getting 3-star Warwick and Tryndamere and having them as being like your primary carries. The core of that build is going to be Tryndamere, Warwick, Zac, and then adding in 5 Chemtech. The easiest way for me to do that is adding in Renata and Singed. Reason why you add these two is because stuff like Victor's a little too expensive, and Singed provides like a nice CC even though he's like a 1-cost unit. After that, I like throwing in 4 Bruisers just because all my dudes are frontline, so I want to make them as beefy as possible. And adding in Tahm Kench, Sejuani, and Vi gives me both Enforcer and 4 Bruiser, so it kind of just makes sense in that way. But you don't need to run that because it's sometimes hard to get Tahm Kench. If you don't get those, you could run 4 Challenger instead, because both Tryndamere and Warwick are both Challenger units. So if you have like a bit of a flex option there with the Tryndamere and Warwick reroll. For items for this, QSS is really good on Warwick because you just want him to have as much uptime as possible. It's not bad on Tryndamere either. Static Shiv is a no-brainer on Warwick because you just want to max out his attack speed. Titans is also good because it gives him a lot of useful stats because he makes use of all of those really well. For Tryndamere, you want him to deal as much damage as possible. That's why we have IE and Last Whisper shining out there. And if you don't have any healing augments, you want to have a Bloodthirster on him because it'll just allow him to go infinite against a lot of different teams. Next up, we have the like more late game, more standard leveling oriented Chemtech build. This one's with 3 Chemtech, but again, I've seen 7 Chemtech builds, I've seen 5 Chemtech builds, and I've seen like this 3 Chemtech build. But since this is more of a standard leveling type of build, you want to go for 4-cost carry. So your main carry is going to be Renata Glask, and then if you get to Victor, especially Victor 2, he's going to be like a pretty powerful guy also. One thing to note, if you have Silco, I like running blue buff on Victor instead of Spear of Shojin because blue buff gives flat 50 mana, and then Silco gives another 40 mana, so he just starts off with 90 mana, and he gets his first cast off like in a relatively quick time. That's why I build him this way, but if you don't have Silco, play a Spear of Shojin because that is going to be the best item on Victor to get him to cast quickly. You could also build both of them, but that is like a luxury that we often don't have. To round out this comp, I like playing 4 Bruisers for sure because you want to give your team as much time as possible to get as many casts off as possible, and just setting it up like this gives you that opportunity. You also want to try to put Victor on the Socialite Hex. That's why we're running this random Seraphine, because it just gives your team a lot of power for 1 unit, and you kind of don't need that extra unit in a lot of different cases. As your main tank, like the guy holding most of your tank items, I like using Zac, but if you get a Tahm Kench 2, he's very welcome to use that instead. But you don't often get Tahm Kench 2, which is why I typically put stuff like Bramble Vest, Gargoyle Stoneplate, Sunfire Cape all on my Zac. I go more in depth on like what I do for each of the different builds down here, so you could go ahead and check that out on my website. Moving on to the next build, we have the Striker build. I don't know why you would want to play the Striker build because there are better builds for both Irelia and Sivir. You kind of do this as like a secondary scenario if you're going for one of the S tier comps, and then like let's say you don't hit them but you hit a lot of the Strikers, then you play the Striker build. We have 6 Strikers here. You could get to 6 Striker by building a Spatula, which is Spatula plus Sword, or you could get it through some of the augments. But I don't really recommend playing this comp unless you actually do get to have 6 Striker, because that's where the main power comes in for this Irelia, because she's going to be jumping around and hopefully one-tapping people with the insane amount of attack damage that she gets from the 6 Striker trait. One great thing about this is that Gnar is a Socialite and a Striker, so you definitely want to be putting Irelia on that Socialite Hex because she's going to be, again, one-tapping everyone. The way you play this build is very similar to the other Irelia build, however, you do have a great secondary carry in Sivir, and she's just going to round out everything and kind of lower everyone's health so that Irelia can kind of dash around and kill everything in one hit. Onto the next build, we have Syndicate Ahri. Ahri is a bit of a weird spot right now. I feel like she is best in the Syndicate build. I've seen her in some Arcanist build, but definitely much stronger in the one you see right in front of us. I'm guessing the reason why is because Syndicate provides a lot of tanky traits, and Ahri, while she doesn't need the tanky traits, she likes her teammates to be tanky because it buys her a lot of time to get a lot of casts off. If you think about it, Ahri is essentially like a stall comp because you want her to get a ton of casts to get a bigger and bigger ultimate, which is essentially what she does. So what you want to do for this build is get great items on Ahri. Blue buff is pretty much required. Jeweled Gauntlet I feel like is the best damage item. And then third item, obviously you want Infinity Edge because it complements Jeweled Gauntlet really well. But if you get like a hat, if you get a Giant Slayer, you're not going to be crying about it. For your main tank, you want it to be Morgana. Morgana is just such a beast of a unit right now. You'll see in a lot of other builds we're also running Morgana as the main tank, and that's just because like even 2-star Morgana, she out-tanks a lot of the tanks right now. So I like putting a lot of items on her. She CCs a bunch of people. If you do get Silco, it's really good to put Silco behind Braum and Morgana because they just give so much CC. If they cast right away, it's pretty much GG right there because their whole front line is just, they just can't move, you know? And sometimes Braum hits some of their back line, sometimes Morgana hits the melee carries. It's all really nice and dandy, and then it gives your Ahri a lot of time to cast. You don't need to Silco up Ahri because she has a blue buff to make her cast, so you want to Silco your front line instead. But yeah, it's a pretty simple comp to do. You pretty much do standard leveling, but one little difference is added. Instead of going level 9 like you do on most comps when you standard level, you stay on level 8 and roll for Morgana 3 if you're close to Morgana 3 because getting a Morgana 3 makes your team super duper tanky. This build I say is pretty difficult if you're like below Masters right now or below Diamond. But if you're Diamond and above, I feel like this is a pretty good comp for you to kind of play because it is a little bit harder than most of the other comps we went over. So if you are like Plat and below, I would kind of avoid the Ahri comp for now. On to the next build, we have the Renata Bruiser build. This comp is on fire right now. It isn't played that much either, so I feel like the time to play it is now. I won't make a video on it yet because I'm only playing Hextech, but you know how sometimes I make those like, you must play this comp now type of videos? Well, if I wasn't only playing Hextech, I would do that video about this build right now. So the reason why this is so strong is because 6 Bruiser or 4 Bruiser, sometimes you get 6, sometimes you get 4, depending on what your augments are. It buys a lot of time for Renata to just get a lot of casts off, apply to Morello to everyone, and then your team is just pretty much like killing everything from there. I don't know what else to say because that's just what the comp does. It's essentially just a stall comp, but not too many people are playing it right now for how good it is. So I do recommend playing this ASAP because yeah, it's probably going to pick up a lot in popularity. So everything I'm saying is like pretty obvious. You want to do like a standard leveling pattern because again, we're going for a 4-cost carry. Blue buff Morello, the best items on her. After that, any AP item or even like a Hextech Gunblade I've seen do well. And then after that, support and tank items are very welcome on this team. Augments that you want are Battle Mage. Battle Mage is insane. Ludens is good. Blue Battery, insane. Second Wind is also good. The reason why Second Wind is good is because you're running a lot of Bruisers. So Bruisers have a lot of health, right? So imagine regenning 50% of your missing health after 10 seconds, which is what Second Wind does. You're going to be pretty chilling with that. Of course, you also want like the random Bruiser plus Chemtech augments, but that goes without saying because that is literally like the main traits of the comp. So whenever you're playing a comp, you generally want the augments that are specific to that comp. I know that like is pretty intuitive to most people, but some people don't really know that. And yeah, like I just need to say it just to set the record straight. Next up, we have Mutant Malzahar. This is also run with Cho'Gath carry. I see a lot of like reroll Malzahar and Cho'Gaths running around right now. I feel like this build is super, super strong, especially in lower elos, because rerolling is a lot easier to play in lower elos because it kind of sets your plan straight so you don't confuse yourself as the game goes on. Because a lot of times, what people do, they like over confuse themselves because they're trying to play perfectly when they're not even close to having that ability. And a lot of times that often ends up making you play worse in that specific game. But if you do a reroll build, most of the game plan's decided for you already. So it makes the game a lot simpler so you make fewer mistakes. I go over a bit on how to play around each different mutant buff down here. If you want to go over the summary, again, it's on my website, but essentially the way you play this build is you slow roll at level 7, you try to go to level 7 as safely as possible, and then you slow roll for Malzahar and Cho'Gath 3. And sometimes if you don't see the 3 stars in your cards, you instead just settle for Malzahar 2 and then go level 9 and then end up using a Kaisa carry. Luckily, she uses the Morellonomicon just as well as Malzahar does. So yeah, they share items pretty easily. And yeah, it's like sometimes you can't always get the 3-star carries that you want. so you have to pivot to something else. Another interesting thing to do is itemizing Kha'Zix. I like him a lot in the attack damage builds, such as Hyperadrenal Glands or Cybernetic Enhancement. He does a little better with those, but I do prefer running the Malzahar and Cho'Gath carries instead. Onto the next builds, we have the B tier. So in the B tier, the first comp we have is the Ashe Reroll. This build is super strong, guys. But the thing is, like, the one caveat is that you need a good reroll Ashe game, and those aren't always easy to get because sometimes you just don't get a lot of copies of Ashe, so you just can't go the comp. That's why it's hard for reroll builds to be in the A tier or S tier, because you just can't go for them that often, and if you can't go for a comp that often, it can't be one of the best comps in the game. So again, I talked about Morgana before. She's going to be the main tank. It's not going to be Braum because Morgana is just a beast right now, and especially with Silco, getting the cast off right away just makes her stun always go off. And yeah, that's another reason why she's so strong. But to play this comp, you reroll for Ashe 3-star at level 6, and then after that you level up to level 7 and reroll for Morgana 3. These are the two carries that you care about the most. If you happen to get a Zyra 3-star, go ahead and buy the Zyras. If you get a Darius 3-star, go ahead and buy the Dariuses. But don't sit at level 6 just because you're looking for the last Zyra. Always level up after hitting Ashe 3 and then go for the Morgana right away. So the core of this build obviously is 5 Syndicate, but if I had to choose 2 more units to put in, it would for sure be the Orianna plus the Jhin, because Jhin gives a sniper buff and then Orianna gives clockwork, which is very welcome for an attack speed based carry such as Ashe. And then of course Silco complements Braum and Morgana so well, as we discussed before, because you just get free casts with them, because Silco gives a lot of mana to your team. The best augments for this comp is of course going to be Sniper and Syndicate. Disintegrator, Weak Spot, Celestial Blessing, and Woodland Trinket is really good because you get extra ashes, so she ends up dealing a ton of damage. And of course Backfoot's good as well because it buffs her attack speed. After that, let's go on into Talon Reroll. This comp is super fun. I've seen it being played a lot. There are a bunch of different variations of it. There's a 4 Assassin version, and then there's a 5 Debonair version. I tend to like the 4 Assassin version more, but sometimes when you're rerolling, you get a lot of the Debonair units, and then you're like, never mind, let me go for 5 Debonair. Essentially, you just want VIP Talon, obviously. In case you guys didn't know, Debonairs, they have a VIP person, and they show up in your shop sometimes, and they make the unit have a special bonus. For Talon, I think it's double damage or something like that, and true damage. And yeah, it's really good if you get him 3-star. The way you play this build, you use a similar positioning tech as we did before. You want to place Blitzcrank on the opposite side of Talon. The reason why you want to do that is because Talon jumps to the other side, attacks someone, and then Blitz hooks that person away, and then Talon starts attacking someone else. That way Talon applies his bleed to 2 different people at one time, and it's just a really nice interaction that is fun to do. So honestly, with this comp, the core units are going to be Talon, Blitzcrank, Syndra, Leona, and Echo. This gives you 2 Assassin, 2 Bodyguard, and 3 Debonair, and 2 Scrap. After that, you just want to add an Assassin. So I have Twitch and Nocturne in here right now. That is because we are rerolling, and sometimes you just randomly hit a Twitch and Nocturne 3-star. However, they are not important at all. They could be literally any Assassin, and you don't even have to run 4 Assassin. You could run 5 Debonair instead. So really pay attention to the cores of the comp, which I list out down here, because you want to build around those units. You don't want to force a specific build every single game because you don't often get those builds in every single game. As for items on Talon, I like having RFC a ton. IE, of course, is necessary on every Assassin build, and then Quicksilver is also really good because it allows him to never get CC'd and it gives him more attack speed. Other items I see work is Hand of Justice and Giant Slayer, but these I feel are the best ones for Talon. Going on into the augments, obviously Assassin buffs and Debonair augments are great. Celestial Blessing's really good. If you have Celestial Blessing, you don't need any healing from the Hand of Justice. Stand Behind Me is actually one of the best augments for this comp. If you do get this, put your bodyguards in front of your assassins and they get a ton of tankiness. Phalanx is good, Backfoot is good, Tiny Titans is good, and Portable Forge, of course, is great because you get a special item for one of your carries, which is very welcome, especially whenever you're focusing on one unit in particular. Portable Forge is going to be really great for that because it is one way to super buff one unit, whereas other augments, they kind of buff your team, and yeah, it just depends on the game and how many items you have. Next build, we have another Debonair build. This time it's going to be Draven. And in the late game, if you do get a Zeri 2-star, like, you could sell your Draven and swap the items onto Zeri because they both kind of use similar items. So for this build, we want 5 Debonair. We want VIP Draven. The VIP bonus gives Draven unlimited range, so he never has to move and pick up an axe. And then to round out this comp after the 5 Debonairs, I like adding in a Blitzcrank for a second bodyguard. You could also use Braum if you want instead of the Blitzcrank, and then I like adding in Quinn to get 2 Challenger to buff up my Draven. If I'm running Zeri carry, I want to add in a Sniper instead. I'd probably run something like Jhin plus Orianna to get Clockwork as well. If you do end up playing Silco in this comp, which I like to do because you get the Scholar bonus, I like putting him behind Syndra and Quinn because Syndra and Quinn both have CC effects. You don't really need it on your front line because Leona just gets a shield and Blitz already starts with full mana, so it's kind of redundant to put it on those people. For this build, you want to do a standard leveling pattern, and I feel like this build is not that great in high elos right now. So if you're like Diamond and below, I feel like Debonair Draven is going to give you better results than if you were Diamond and above right now. That's not to say it can't work in Diamond and above, it's just like weaker than the other comps that we've went over so far. As for augments, Weak Spot is incredibly good in this build. I've seen Weak Spot 3 be like one of the best augments for this. After that, Stand United's pretty good because you run a bunch of different traits. You could also like run 3 Debonair instead and add in more traits if you do get the Stand United trait. Disintegrator's pretty good because Draven attacks really quickly. Backfoot, obviously, anything that buffs Draven in the backline is going to be very welcome. And then Celestial Blessing, getting that allows you to not run Bloodthirster. So you could run extra damage on him instead, so you could put stuff like Infinity Edge, Last Whisper, things of that nature onto your Draven. Next up, we have the Twitch Innovator Reroll build. This is very similar to the Twitch Reroll build we had in the last set. Actually, I think it's almost the exact same. But this time, I'm running 5 Innovator. You essentially want to reroll for Twitch, Singe, Camille, Ezreal, and then add in like Warwick and Zillion if you can, and then after that, like, you don't really care that much about other units apart from Twitch, but if you do end up getting a bunch of 3-stars, like, they're very welcome. You put your tank items on either Camille or Singe, whoever you 3-star first. Your secondary carry is going to be Echo. I like putting a Morello Namicon on him and also a Frozen Heart if you happen to have like an extra tier item, because if you notice Twitch's items, he pretty much doesn't use any component for Frozen Heart, so Frozen Heart is a great slam if you like have the items and need to build something. Itemization on Twitch, of course, is going to be Infinity Edge as being the most important. After that, I like Runons because it allows him to not get stuck on one target, and then Last Whisper is just a great item to complement with IE and helps him kill tanks. One thing to note is that you want to reroll at level 5 for this build, and you really only care about Twitch. The rest doesn't really matter. Once you hit Twitch 3-star, level up, and then after that you roll for 3-star 2 costs if you can. If not, you level up and play as many assassins or innovators as you can. You might notice here we have 5 innovators right now. You don't like need 5 innovators, but it's very easy to fit. But if you run 3 innovator, 4 assassin, I'm not gonna go and like find out where you live or something like that. Essentially, all that matters is Twitch, and then like the extra innovator for 5 innovator is like a nice tank unit. But if you don't get it, you could just add in more damage with more assassins. But a lot of the assassin units just aren't that great this set, so that's why we end up going for the innovators right now. As for augments, any economy or reroll augment is really good, such as like calculated loss. Future Sight is extremely good because you are an assassin player. Assassin players love Future Sight because, I mean, you just get to know who you're playing, and positioning is so important on a lot of assassins because you want to be on specific sides against specific teams. Titanic Force is really good in all reroll comps because it just gives you a lot of attack damage because you all will have high health and all will benefit from the Titanic Force buff. Phalanx is good for giving more defense to your assassins. Stand United, you run so many different traits. Like, even though you're like a reroll build, Stand United is incredibly good. Ludens is decent because you cast a bunch. Chemtech, obviously you're like a Chemtech unit. Twitch is a Chemtech, so it's great. Nice Edge is good, Tiny Titans is good, Backfoot's good, and of course any like assassin buff is good as well. On to the next builds, we have the C tiers. I'll kind of go over these kind of quickly because I'm gonna be honest, like they're just really underperforming right now. If you really love playing the C tier comps, like no shame in that. Like we play the game to have fun, right? So just a forewarning, they are performing not as good as every other comp. Maybe it's because people haven't figured out the best ways to play them yet. Maybe it's because they actually just suck. We'll see in the next week. But brand reroll, this is a sample build I have here. We'll go over these pretty quickly, but essentially you want VIP brand. If you don't get a lot of brands and you end up getting a lot of Syndras, you could swap into a Syndra build. Syndra build actually is pretty good. I'd probably rate Syndra reroll maybe around like B-, C+ tier, and the brand reroll in like C tier for sure. Going on into the next build, we have the Corki Yordle reroll build. This one is just like, I don't know why Tristana wasn't that great. I mean, she was okay last set, but it seems like Corki's going to be in that same spot as Tristana was before. But Corki is a little different in that he uses ability power items, so getting a blue buff on Corki is really good. He also deals magic damage, so Jeweled Gauntlet's good. IEJG is a good combo as well. I see Hat on him a bunch, Giant Slayer, and then of course Vex is going to be your main tank whenever you're going to be playing Yordles. But solid build. I expect this comp to rise up in maybe the next patch. Just because I think that I don't think 6 Yordles is the best way to run this. I'm thinking this needs like a 3 Yordle build and just kind of leave it at that. But we'll see how this build develops in the future. Sniper Jhin, just do not play Jhin. Just trust me on this right now. Until they fix Jhin, just do not play Jhin. That's why I don't have an image up for this, because I don't even want you guys to play this right now. Yordle Veigar, kind of the same thing, but if you want to have fun, it's pretty much the same thing as a Corki build, except you add in Veigar over one of the units. Now let's go on into the items. That's going to be it for the compositions. But items starting carousel priority is super important right now, because the 2 S tier comps, they both want sword and glove, because you want to build a lot of the damage items for both Sivir and Irelia. And yeah, so sword is good for Zeke's Herald in the Sivir build, and any item for Irelia is going to be good. Glove, you want it for all the crit items. It's good for Quicksilver Sash on Sivir as well. Tear, good for Static Shiv. Bow, good for Static Shiv. Tear also allows you to flex into the blue buff builds, such as Ahri and Renata. Belt and Chain, they're kind of like decent early game items. So you use these to slam early game items to kind of win streak with. Rod, I feel like, is a little lackluster, and Negatron is always like, I don't know why, but Negatron always feels like the worst item to start with in the game. I think it's because Dragonclaw is not as useful as like Bramble Vest, for example. But I did also update the item tier list here. But essentially in the early game, you just want to slam a lot of items right now. Whenever we have the start of a set, people don't know what they're doing. So when people don't know what they're doing, it's very easy to get top 4s because you just built a bunch of items. You didn't have like 10 items on your bench. And you just win by like having more health than other people. I know that sounds really simple, but because strategies are not optimized, they don't have that big power spike when they hit level 8. If you compare that to last week, where people have been perfecting a playstyle for like 3 months, of course they're going to do a super hard spike. But right now they're not, because no one knows what they're doing. That's why slamming items is a really popular strategy to climb early on. For the early game, I also do recommend doing like Bruiser front lines, strikers as like attack damage carries, because I feel like those are one of the best starts right now. Of course, you could use like anything as your item holder because every game is always different. But essentially, if you want to just donkey force a comp, do the Hextech build because it's just that strong. I don't even have an incentive to tell you to do this because I'm doing a Hextech only challenge right now. It's not because they're good. It's just because they're one of the new traits and I just decided to go for it on the first day. But yeah, it is actually just like by far the most played by the highest skilled players, and it's like getting one of the best results as well, which is a rare combination. Socialite Irelia, you could force this comp, but it will take you a bit of practice because you don't always go for Irelia. Innovators are good at all elos right now, but it is especially good at like diamond and below, I believe. But yeah, there's a lot of different strategies you can choose right now. Of course, like as the week goes on, like we're going to see a lot of other different strategies develop. You can't just like know everything that's going to happen in the first week. If you do, you're like a genius. But I wish you had the fortune-telling prediction for like other things than predicting good TFT comps. But of course, things are going to change. If you guys remember past sets, I think like in set 5 or something like that, people didn't like Vayne at all. But then people figured out you build like Shadow Zeke's on Vayne, and then she became the best comp in like the next day, and everyone started playing it. So there are a lot of undiscovered things out there right now. So if you guys do have something that's like super broken OP that you think I should know about, let me know down in the comments below. But apart from that, I think that is going to be it for me today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this list. I put like a lot of work into this. Normally I don't have this much stuff filled out in the first week. So hopefully you guys make good use of this. Hopefully you guys do well in your climbs. But again, let me know what your favorite comps are so far. I'm going to be coming out with actually like a lot of guides this set. I know last set I said I would, but I didn't. But this set I actually am going to make a lot of guides. So do subscribe if you have not already, if you want notifications for that. If you don't, like, no sweat, don't need to subscribe. But yeah, that's going to be it for me. I will see you all later. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe. And of course, smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.